Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah, this is my Granny Era, and I want to share with you guys my thoughts on my current reread of The Scarlet Letter. Now, I have reread this month for Nathanuary, which is an event that I host every January, where we read and appreciate the literature of the American author Nathaniel Hawthorne. And this year's group read was The Scarlet Letter. I finished this towards the beginning of the month, but wanted to save the analytical video for the end of the month because it does contain spoilers. So if you are not familiar with the story and you don't want to know anything, you probably better turn off the video now. Let's get into the analysis of this story. Now, Hawthorne, just as a writer, he speaks a lot to the idea of people making judgments without facts. I always tell my kids, and I try to function on this principle of not judging someone based on other people's opinions of them. And I think that that's a really good phrase for this book in particular, and the direction I'm going to go with it today. He talks about, people being stuck in their ways and being afraid to be objective. This is kind of his theme in a lot of his writing and a lot of his short stories. Being afraid to stand up for truth in the face of opposition, right? All of that kind of stuff. But there are so many themes, directions I could go with in this discussion. I think, though, the direction that I want to go with today and this particular analysis is, in The Scarlet Letter, there are virtually 4 characters, and none of them are what they seem. Everyone is not actually who others think they are. And that's what I want to pull out from the story in this video. So let me tell you a little bit about the story, The Scarlet Letter. If you are not familiar with this story, it takes place during the Puritan times in New England. And the book opens up with Hester Prynne, a woman in a Puritan community who is let out of prison, and she comes out with a baby girl, her baby girl, that she has named Pearl. That is referencing the Bible verse about finding a pearl of great price. And she has a letter A embroidered on the bodice of her dress. And she has to wear this A, I guess, forever, to indicate to the community that she is an adulteress and that she has committed adultery on her husband. So she is married, but her husband has been gone, and the husband has been gone long enough that this baby is clearly not his. Now, later on in the story, it's kind of hinted at that someone remembers her husband having been there long ago, like maybe even a decade or something, like a long time ago. So the guy has been gone a long time. We would think that that is abandonment, but we won't go into that because it'll ruin the story. So she comes out of prison. She's got this letter A. Everybody knows she's an adulteress. She's an adulteress. Now, right off the bat, you get the idea, you are made aware that nobody knows who the father of this baby is. And she's not talking. So, she is basically suffering this shame by herself in a public way. Everybody, of course, is looking down on her because they are a Puritan community and they're all holier than thou. The story really only has 4 main characters. So Hester being one, the baby Pearl being one. In the crowd of people who watch her come out of prison ends up being her husband, which is going by the name of Roger Chillingsworth, so no one will know who he is. So her name is Hester Prynne. He's Roger Chillingsworth, different name, right? So nobody will figure out that that's actually her husband. And he says, don't you tell anybody. So he's there. So that's character number 3. And then the 4th character is Arthur Dimmesdale, who is the pastor of the local church, preacher, whatever they called him in those days. And he is the 4th character and turns out the father of the baby. You find that out fairly soon in the story, so that's not a huge spoiler, but, again, I did warn you. The story goes on where Roger Chillingsworth tells Hester, do not tell anybody who I am, and then he ends up moving in with the pastor, who is very sick. He moves in with him to take care of him because Arthur is an intellectual and has studied medicine, and I guess is going to help cure him of the sickness that he has. Now, throughout the story, we're basically just following the consequences of this, sin that these people committed together. Now, the community is a Christian community, right? They're living under biblical principles. So to the community, what Hester did was a sin that needed to be punished and, whatever. She's got to do her penance. But they are like consistently asking her, reveal the name of your accomplice here. Tell us who the father is so that we can, basically they can take the same sort of, punishment on him, maybe even a harsher punishment. She won't tell, not because it's the pastor of the town that everybody looks up to, right? Who in those days was probably the most important figure in the town at the time. I don't think it's because of that she won't tell. I think it's because Hester understands something about redemption of your own heart and forgiving your own self. And she knows that you're not actually ever really truly free from something that you did that you shouldn't have done until you have forgiven yourself, right? And she knows that if Dimmesdale is revealed, not only is he going to suffer that same sort of just shame and unfairness of not being able to sort of reveal yourself, right? That she had to go through. She was found out, it was clear that she had sinned because here's this baby. So not only would he not have that opportunity to, take responsibility for his own actions when he was ready, but secondly, it would mess with his redemption process, right? She wanted him to be able to come to a point where he felt like admitting and owning it, right? Owning them, was more important than his status, his name, his whatever. And so she doesn't say anything. And so I have a lot of thoughts about that. Was Dimmesdale, the pastor, was he that way because he really was just full of himself and didn't want to admit that he had sinned and he liked his position as pastor? Or did he have a heart for the people in the town and he didn't want to wreck their faith, right? That they would lose faith in God because the man of God had fallen? There's a lot of reasons, and I don't know that I totally can at this point speak to Dimmesdale's motivations, but that might be something to look at in a later reread. So basically, like I said, goes through the different reactions that people are having, the consequences of what, they have done. And so I'd like to go into each character and how their reaction and just, what happens afterward kind of tells that story that there's another side and everyone here is not actually who others think they are. Now, in the story, like I said, Dimmesdale, he's kind of leading this double life because he's the one who she committed this, sin with, but he's the one who's not actually suffering the punishment, the public punishment that Hester is suffering. Everybody in town thinks he is the highest example of godliness, right? When actually inside he feels like the deadest, worst, most shameful, sinful example of godliness, because not only has he sinned, he's hiding it from everyone and allowing his supposed lover, who he supposedly loves, and daughter to live alone, and suffer the public consequences. So he's kind of living this double life. He's refusing to bring his sin into the light. It eats away at his heart. It's actually literally killing him. And he is just so much lacking in hope. We really only get one little glimpse of hope in him when they talk about maybe leaving. The three of them leaving together, him and Pearl and Hester all just leaving, going to another community, starting over, fake names, new identities, let's just start over again. And we see a glimpse of hope there in him. But for the most part, he's kind of a man who is rotting inside. Yet everyone else thinks that he is a great example of godliness, somebody to look up to, right? They get a parade and he's like, it's just a whole thing. So very obvious double life there. Very clear representation of this whole theme I'm going with here. All right, secondly is Roger Chillingsworth. And remember, he is the husband of Hester. He has been gone for a long time. He has come back. Now, Chillingsworth is much older than Hester. And so he married her as a young girl. He was like old, like stinking old, like way old. But he was an intellectual. I think he had like gone to Oxford and all this stuff. Like he was like a well educated man, and he was under just like some kind of impression, I guess, that she had married him for his brains, and she was so impressed by his intellect. But apparently that wasn't the case, and so he just, you know, sort of took advantage of the fact that he had this young and beautiful wife. He took off, and I can't even remember why it was that he had left town, but he even just kind of talks about how, yeah, I probably neglected you, and I probably, you know, failed to see your needs and all this kind of stuff. And Chillingsworth is like a perfect name, right? Because this guy, he is so creepy. So he serves as kind of like an herbalist doctor. They call him a leech, right? Because that's like kind of another word for a doctor, right? Because you put the leeches on and the whole thing. Well, that's a great pun, right, for this guy, because he is a leech. He moves in with Dimmesdale, the pastor. He moves in there to treat him. And I think Dimmesdale is kind of like flattered, or even just thankful that there's another intellectual there, right? Because Dimmesdale is a learned man. This guy's a learned man. So, you know, Dimmesdale's like, great, I've got someone on my level I can have, you know, like academic sort of conversations with and whatever. And I guess Chillingsworth is going to like treat his illness or whatever. And I think that he does, but it's all for malevolent purposes. He is he's gaslighting. He plays weird mind games with Dimmesdale. And on other former reads, I've kind of even got the impression maybe he was poisoning him with some of the herbs. I don't really know about that, but he's definitely messing with his mind and allowing him to live in his guilt. Now, Dimmesdale doesn't know that is Hester's husband. He also doesn't know that Chillingworth knows that he's Pearl's father, right? So Dimmesdale is totally in the dark. He does not realize this guy has bad intentions toward him. So Chillingsworth, again, is not what he appears to be, both to Dimmesdale and to the rest of the community, who thinks that here's this great smart doctor guy who's moved in to help heal and cure their pastor. He's actually there to torment him, and to torment Hester in the process. He kind of has her under his thumb as well, just like a little blackmail that goes on, but she eventually overcomes. She eventually defeats him. All right, so then the next character we have is Pearl. That is the little baby girl who ends up, as time goes on, we see her as a little girl. Now, this is really actually the character that inspired me to go this direction with this analysis, as far as people not being who others think they are, because in every other read through of this story that I have done over the years, I have always seen Pearl the way Hester sees her. Hester thinks that she is like a demon child who has been sent to punish her. So Pearl is very precocious, and she says things that sort of convict Hester, sort of poke her and remind her of her sin. She, at one point, Hester takes the A off. She takes the emblem off of her bodice and throws it near the river. And hoping, I guess, that it'll go in the river and wash away, but it doesn't. It just lands on the bank. Well, Pearl has been off playing, and when Hester calls her to come back, Pearl sees from the distance that her mother has taken her hair down and she has removed the A. And Pearl is not okay with that, and Pearl will not come. And so Hester actually has to go and get the A and put it back on her bodice again and put her hair back up and cover it with her head covering again. And then Pearl is like, that's my mom. And she comes and she kisses the A. Now, Hester sees that as this, the devil tormenting her, and she just can't be free, and no matter how hard she tries, she just can't be free of this because of this child whom she loves, but is also sort of terrifying, right? Because she won't sort of like she just represents to her, her sin that she can't seem to walk away from. So in the past, I have read stuff like that and words that Hester has said, and I've been like, yeah, wow, what a demon child. She's totally there as a punishment. But now, like, after having raised 9 children and kind of looking at that situation from a more mature perspective, I'm realizing that's just what was familiar, right? That was her mother. That's what she saw as her mother, but Hester saw it as a way to remind her of her sin. And so throughout that story, the character of Pearl, she's not actually what Hester is making her out to be. She's not an evil demon child. She's not there to, sent by the devil to remind her. She's just a kid being precocious, and actually, really, she's a representation of life. She is just out there living and enjoying everything there is to, take in. It says that Hester dresses her in beautiful clothing but is also representative of the A. So she dresses her in scarlet dresses with gold thread and gold trimmings and things. And so she's wearing these beautiful clothes, but she's also, in Hester's mind, an extension of that A that she has to wear on the front of her bodice. Now, I just want to throw this in here, completely random, but just in case there are other Stargate SG-1 fans watching this, the character of Adria in the last portion of the original SG-1 series, the demon child, right, of Vala and the Ori. I was just thinking of her as I was reading through this. I think this is the first time I've actually read the Scarlet Letter since watching those episodes of Stargate, but if you know who I'm talking about, I'll put an image up here if I can find one of little Adria, right? She's born as a baby, but within hours she's a young girl, and then within more hours she's a young woman. But how is she dressed, right? In red clothing with beautiful gold trimmings. She's the demon child that her mother both loves and is terrified of. She says very precocious and wise things that sort of stab you, right? And prick your consciousness and mess with you. She's a representative of a religious figure, an oppressive religion for that. Like, it just occurred to me, I really think that they based Adria off of Little Pearl in the Scarlet Letter. At the end of the story, we get the impression that Pearl actually grows up to be a very kind and compassionate young woman who does not forget her mother in her old age. And just reading just those last few lines about Pearl as an adult, like, it's all fine. And she probably never was evil to begin with. It is really just what's in Hester's mind. All right, so that's the third character. Now we get to the character of Hester. The townspeople have their thoughts about her, right, that are not exactly accurate, but the real discrepancy here is that Hester does not feel about herself the way the townspeople think she feels about herself. The Scarlet Letter A is not actually serving much of a purpose at all for Hester, if you really kind of look at her story as a whole. She's walking in freedom more and more as the story goes on. She is freed from a marriage that she didn't want. She is freed from the guilt of hidden sin because there's nothing to hide. Everything's been brought out into the light for Hester, which is really, honestly, the only point at which you can start healing, right? When everything is sort of hidden and not dealt with, there's a lot of healing that can't happen. But once it's all brought out and clear and obvious and it's all laid out, that's when you really can start taking the steps to fully heal from something, right? And so she's doing that. When I talk about this book, I always say that you can't really understand Hester unless you've been Hester. And I'm not talking about, having a love child or whatever. I'm talking about having to hold your head up in a situation where there are more people against you than there are for you. Where you're misunderstood, right? You're misrepresented. Maybe you're receiving an unfair or a harsher consequence than you deserve for something that has happened. But you rise above that and you allow yourself to heal. And you make changes because you want to change, right? And not because, oh, you're being pressured into it by others or whatever. That is who Hester is. And once you've walked through that, like, you get her. The people thought that Hester was, I guess, more concerned with their opinions than she actually was, because she really just goes on to live her life. And she doesn't really care too much about what they have to say. And so after, you know, a fairly short time, their opinions start to drop off. We don't read so much about their opinions anymore because they just don't matter to her. Now, I did say that there are 4 characters in the story, but I would like to submit a possible 5th character, and that is the letter A itself. In the story, the letter A was meant to symbolize adultery. By wearing it, Hester was branded as an adulterer. In that community, this was a sin, very much not okay. And so the people have given her this identity. You are an adulterer. They have defined her identity. They have put themselves in a place of deciding her punishment, what it should be, how long it should be, how long should she have to bear this. But the truth of the matter, though, is that when it comes to sins of the heart, it's really us who determines how long we're going to suffer. It's only us who decides how long we are going to continue living in shame and guilt. It's only ourselves who decide how long we're going to allow this to hold us back mentally and emotionally and spiritually. It's up to us how long it's going to take us to heal. Hester's story never actually gets really phenomenally awesome, but it does end with like a calm, peaceful assurance, a settled feeling, a stable feeling. She's okay with herself, with her situation, with her life. She's okay with it. But it's not something that anyone did. It's just what she has done, what she has come to settle in her own heart. And then the narrator even tells us that that letter A comes to symbolize something differently to the whole community. Where it once symbolized adulterer, it now symbolizes Abel. They see Hester as someone to be looked up to. They've watched her walk through all of the things that she's walked through and continue to live a life, continue to be, someone of good character and an asset to society. She works as a seamstress to support herself all this time. And she makes beautiful clothing for, all kinds of people and events. And they end up seeing that A as something that she should be proud of, to signify that she is able. That's how it ends. That's how they end up thinking of her in the end. But what Hester shows us throughout the story about strength and being in charge of your own destiny, she shows us that Abel is what that letter has symbolized all along. This is a fantastic story in so many ways. It can be a little intimidating because it starts out with an introduction called The Customs House that is, I guess, supposed to set the stage for how apparently this whole idea for the story came to be. I have always thought that introduction portion was a fictional story. Basically, it says that the narrator, who is assumed to be Nathaniel Hawthorne himself, worked in a custom house, which he did, and came across a roll of papers with a embroidered letter A rolled up inside. And when he opened it up and saw this beautiful piece of fabric, he read the papers and he learned the history of Hester Prynne and then went on to write this story. Now, I have always thought that was a fictional account, and when I've read things online, it seems that it's a fictional account. However, Nathaniel Hawthorne's son Julian does say that it was not a fictional account, that part really did happen, and that's what inspired his father. So whether or not Julian bought into the story, or it maybe really is a true story. Maybe it really did start off that way. I don't really know, but I will say that the entire story can be enjoyed without ever touching that introduction, the custom house. So if that has... So if that has intimidated you, I would just suggest you skip the custom house introduction. All you need to know is everything I just told you. That's basically the gist of it. Skip that part and get straight to the story. You will probably be sucked into the story pretty quickly if you'll skip that bogged down introduction. Guys, I hope that this inspired you and encouraged you maybe to look at the works of Nathaniel Hawthorne. I have really enjoyed this Nathanuary. I got a lot out of it. We've had some good discussion in the Discord group. If you would like to join into that or even just sort of lurk and see what we're talking about, go ahead and check out the Discord that I have down in my description box. It's my own Discord for my channel with all my stuff on there. So join us and you'll, get to see all the things that I'm doing and talking about with my other listeners. But I hope this was a fun video for you guys. Mark your calendars for next January. We will do Nathanuary all over again with a new group read and lots of new fun things to discuss. Have a great day, guys. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.